Oxford Group, the largest Brazilian consulting firm in the United States for over 40 years, presents Economy and You. Brought to you by Leif Pereira, Araujo Law, 3 decades of experience in immigration in the United States.
Good evening, dear friends. Today we are going to discuss a subject that directly concerns our pockets regarding everything we had to see with the European Union and our hearts, because we are going to talk in particular about Portugal. Today, the trade relationship between Brazil and the European Union exceeds 87 billion euros, which has a very significant meaning. The service sector has increased by more than 71% in recent years, from 2021 to 2025. And with Portugal alone, in this last quarter of 2025, we reached more than 4 billion in business. To talk a little more about the details of this and how we can do better business in Europe, we invited a great expert on the Brazil-Portugal relationship, who, although her name has Portugal in it, is Brazilian. Magda Portugal, thank you very much for your presence and your support on this program.
Thank you, Barbieri. It is a great pleasure to be here speaking with you and your viewers about this long-standing and recently very well-developed relationship between Brazil and Portugal. Thank you.
Magda, you who are always flying back and forth, they say your address is the air bridge, right, between Brazil and Portugal. We have seen that business between the two countries has grown significantly. Today, after this agreement, right, it seems things have increased quite a bit. How is Europe viewing this greater presence of Brazil investing in such a significant way in the market, considering that today the European Union is our second largest trading partner, having surpassed the United States, only being surpassed by China?
Well, I think we can divide this answer into before Trump and after Trump, right? Before Trump, we know that the trade agreements, Mercosur and Europe, had been stalled for many years. We had strong corporatism in Europe in the agricultural sector, where Brazil is strong, which prevented us from closing a stronger agreement. Then Trump arrived with his protectionist measures and tariffs, which caused the agreement that had been sitting in a drawer for 15 years to finally be signed. Today, Brazil has a signed agreement with Europe, which transforms our second largest trading partner, the first being China, into a strong partner and forces Brazilians, entrepreneurs, and C-level executives to prepare for this new world. Portugal Europa, the company of which I am CEO, is a company that has already been informally going to Portugal for 15 years, as I have been taking families of Brazilians, entrepreneurs, and retired Brazilian millionaires who go to enjoy their money there in Europe, in Portugal. It is prepared to build this bridge between Brazilian companies and European companies. So basically what I have seen now after the signing of the Mercosur agreement has been a continuation of Brazilian entrepreneurs who seek Portugal not as a final destination, but as a hub to explore the rest of Europe. So today, Europe has very interesting lines of credit for companies in certain sectors, and when a Brazilian entrepreneur seeks either a strategic partner or sets up their company in Portugal, they start to access this entire framework of credit lines and facilities that the European community provides to entrepreneurs. In return, they have to comply with a series of regulations. Europe is an extremely regulated continent, different from what you have there in the United States. Regulation is the name of the game there, and because of this regulation, Portugal Europa and the Board Academy, which is one of the most prestigious institutions here in Brazil for training board members, we have prepared 2 courses, 2 cohorts to train corporate governance, to train company board members focused on Brazil and Europe, to provide a transatlantic perspective, to provide a view of all the regulation that your company needs to have to be established in Europe to do business in Europe, to have partners in Europe, to have clients in Europe, including in an area where Brazil is just starting out. I don't know if the United States is much more advanced either, which is ESG. In Europe, without some ESG standards, companies cannot advance and cannot gain access to those credit lines I just mentioned.
What are these credit lines? You talk a lot about Portugal, this 2030 line, the possibility of financing. Can you detail a bit what these credit lines are? Are they different?
Barbieri, they are sector-specific and defined by the needs of each country. Portugal strongly prioritizes three areas: the tourism sector, the industrial sector focused on the food industry, wine, almonds, olive oil, and other projects like fish farming, and projects focused on ESG and technology. Portugal has transformed into a major technology hub, competing today with Ireland, attracting labor. The famous digital nomads go in search of mild temperatures for most of the year, good wine, good food, and, well, good surfing. You can surf on the vast majority of the beaches. You can surf, you can go kite surfing. And it ended up attracting these young digital nomads and becoming a major technology hub. So today, Portugal offers those credit lines you heard about, practically subsidized. They aren't just Portuguese lines. The Development Bank of Portugal uses these lines that the European community makes available to put into sectors that Portugal wants to develop, which are the ones I mentioned: technology, agribusiness, tourism. Eventually, some industry that might be lacking in Portugal, which will be studied on a case-by-case basis. But that is the country's vocation, and those lines are there for that purpose. And we can, on a case-by-case basis, we have quite a bit of access to the Development Bank of Portugal through its advisor, its chairman, who is Carlos Leiria. We can even do an interview with you about these lines, but they will all depend on a business plan. They will depend on a good governance structure that this company must have for it to start sitting down and talking about having access to Europe. Having access to Europe is not a simple thing. It's not just moving to Portugal and opening your company there. Having access to Europe means understanding that in exchange for everything Europe offers the entrepreneur, it also demands a lot in terms of regulation.
Right. Europe is a country logically, it's an entirely regulated continent.
Exactly.
Some even say excessively regulated. And so regulated that nowadays the standards it set for vehicles, only China can meet, right?
That's true. That's true.
So this logically for the Brazilian means a positive challenge.
Exactly.
Because Brazilians are very inclined to understand regulations and overcome them. As we say, we only have a problem when we don't know about it. Once we know, it becomes a challenge.
Exactly. Knowledge is the key to everything.
These lines, from what we hear, correspond to a system that can reach a high percentage, right? Up to 3/4 of the investment.
That's right.
And these lines also imply that for a company to try for these lines, it must have the capacity to be competent and have financial capacity, because the financing reimburses the investment made. Is that really how it works?
Yes, I think that today, without being a specialist in credit lines, just from the practice of connecting Brazilian companies to European companies or helping Brazilian companies establish themselves in Portugal, just from that experience, I can say that first and foremost, what is looked at is the ability to pay. And secondly, of course, the collateral, but first and foremost is the business plan. And to gain access to these lines, this business plan goes through various regulatory aspects, including how deep the ESG component is within that company. This is fundamental in Europe. So it's no use having ESG focused only on marketing. Oh, because I have ESG, I have a quota. In Europe, this is taken seriously in every aspect, even in civil construction. For those who want to be an entrepreneur in Portugal and take advantage of it, because one of the fastest growing areas is construction, it's the area of real estate appreciation. Even in this area, regulation is very strong. And the idea of ESG, how you build, what you use to build, whether you are pro-environment or not, whether you are a polluter or not, even this is taken into consideration when the development bank releases your line of credit. So it requires that you have the support of companies accustomed to making this project finance happen. So in this aspect, Portugal Europa can help the company because we have access, depending on the size of the company, from a BDO type firm, which is one of the top four, to a mid-level consultancy, which can help in this project process to obtain lines of credit. And then the entrepreneur enters a world that doesn't exist in Brazil, right, Barbieri? And it doesn't exist in the United States either, right? Because there, everything is done with your own money, but he enters a world that isn't accessible in Brazil because the interest rate here prevents any free initiative. Who has a business that will generate a return above this interest rate today? Even the long-term interest rate here is projected in double digits. So who can actually undertake and build something new in Brazil with this interest rate? And in the United States, what stops it is it's easy for a company to set up. You're the expert on this, you know that, but you have to have your own capital. It's very difficult to go to a bank. There are no state-owned banks that will go there and make credit lines available. Europe, despite being extremely regulated, has these accessible lines. Provided you enter one of these sectors they are seeking investment in, and you create a project, a business plan that meets all these regulations.
Perfect. There is a doubt that the press has been raising in a not so emphatic way regarding this Mercosur Europe agreement. There were limitations. Some countries imposed vetoes, right, regarding certain exports from Brazil. So meat, agricultural products have been limited. And there is news in the press referring to the fact that some Brazilians in Portugal are not so welcome. You who travel on both sides, right, back and forth and so on. What is your perception in both areas? How well received is the Brazilian who wants to invest and develop in Portugal? Two, how do you see outside of Portugal, which receives us wonderfully well, in other countries, this resistance? What is the level of resistance that we will have in trade between Brazil and the European Union as a whole?
I see it this way, and I can't speak as I always do. I give several interviews in Portugal, and I always say, I don't represent the Brazilian who goes there looking for a job. I represent the Brazilian who goes there to invest or to enjoy, buy real estate, invest in real estate, and enjoy their retirement, their fortune, or is an entrepreneur who will invest and create jobs. So, but the answer I'm going to give, it applies to everyone. What is very important in your change of continent is this transatlantic vision. Whether you go to Portugal looking for a job or to invest, to set up a company there, you have to change your language. And changing your language isn't just about speaking with a Portuguese accent, it's about switching the cultural button.
Uh-huh.
You have to accept European culture as it is. It is not a culture of everything for yesterday. It is a culture where people reflect before answering an email. They don't have the rush that we have to respond, which is very good on one hand and often sounds superficial, like an answer that wasn't deep, that didn't require much reflection. So we have to go and flip the cultural, linguistic cultural switch. That is the advice I give to any Brazilian, whether you are going to start a company or go there to live, enjoy your savings, or even look for a job today, of course, legally, right? With the visa already before, but it is flip the switch. You can't think like a Brazilian and want to start a business in Europe. That said, yeah, this is the cultural aspect that today makes all immigrants, not just Brazilians, have difficulty in Europe, in the United States, in any country. Because if you enter a culture wanting to change it, wanting to transform it into your own culture, you will have great difficulties. It doesn't matter if you have money, if you are investing, you are entering another culture. To change a culture, it takes years, sometimes hundreds of years. You have to remember that Europe only reached the point it reached with such a strong regulatory state because it became wealthy enough to keep a very large part of the population well above the poverty line in a middle class, upper middle class bracket. So that was an acquired right. No one is going to change or impose a work culture on them. So that's what I tell everyone, whatever your level, whatever your proposal, if you're going to work, go legally with a visa already. If you're going to invest, look for someone who will facilitate it. Look for a company that will help you. That will be the facilitator. But go with an open mind to flip the switch. You are no longer in Brazil, just as you are no longer in the United States. If it's a Brazilian living there, I have cases of several Brazilians who lived in Miami, went to Portugal, and complained about something in Miami. See what it's like not to flip the cultural switch. They complained about certain characteristics of Americans. Then they go to live in Portugal and start complaining about various European characteristics. So it's about having an open mind, opening your mind, and understanding that you are entering a new culture. It's not them who will change, it's you who will change your mindset.
Yeah, that's very important, that warning of yours, because we see here in the United States, I would say that 90% of the cause of failure for companies that came here, and there are many, lies in arrogance. He thinks first that what he did well in Brazil will be replicated here and he will be, as they say in plain Portuguese, the big cheese, and everyone will come running after him. And then using a practical example, if he didn't do half stitches on shoes in Brazil, he has to teach the American there that a half stitch is uneconomical. And then there are 320 million people who don't agree with him, and he ends up failing, really. And I see from your words that Europe is the same thing. It's a structured culture. Logically, each country has its own, but as a continent, the view is from that perspective. And there is no country more welcoming to Brazilians than Portugal, without a shadow of a doubt. And the second part of the question, do you feel that the agreement with the European Union will continue to face this difficulty? You highlighted at the beginning of your speech that there was an agreement, right? Some say 15, others say 26 years stalled, and that it wasn't moving forward, and that Trump was the great driver of it.
He was unintentionally.
Unintentionally, but he was, right? And with that, logically, opportunities opened up. But we are seeing in practice that there is protectionism in certain segments. So France has segments that will be affected, Germany has some others, and so on. In Portugal, is there any segment that you identify as having any resistance to this agreement, or is it the most amenable country?
No, Portugal has an economy that, for starters, is very small and very dependent on imports. Yeah, Portugal is not an exporting country. And so for Portugal, this is much easier to understand than for the rest of Europe. France also has a small agribusiness if you compare it to ours, but it has a history of protectionism, a very large history of corporatism, just like Germany and Italy, even among themselves, right? So we know, yeah, where the issue came from. You can't call it champagne if the wine doesn't come from the Champagne region. And it goes on like that for several products. Will this type of protectionism continue to exist? Will it gradually be torn down by what is the factor that can tear this down? It's access to certain products, such as, for example, beef, at a much cheaper price, which they manage to do in the following way. They have labels where they stipulate where that meat came from. So in France, if you are that super traditional Frenchman or a starred restaurant, Michelin, etc., you will only buy meat, butter that comes from France. And it even says which region of France it comes from. So they have the chicken, the best region for chicken, the best region for meat, the best region for butter. The Camembert cheese is from Camembert, and in Normandy. And they will continue to maintain these traditions. But the general public, the large population, when they go to the supermarket to buy and Brazil will enter through its productivity in agribusiness, which is indisputable. We gained productivity. We invested through Embrapa in productivity. Brazil will enter on the price factor and will never replace these products of the highest quality, nor this patriotic feeling they have of, I only consume cheese if it's from such and such region. This will continue. It's inevitable, but it's also inevitable that progress will bring our products to them, just as the technology that YouTubers brought to Portugal brought Brazilian Portuguese. Today, children in Portugal no longer say cão, dog. They say cachorro because they watch Inaldinho, Lucas Neto, and all these YouTubers. And you are welcome there. My son went to rent a car. He was there with me in July. He went to rent a car, and the guy said, wow, you look just like that bald Brazilian guy who travels the world. He said, who? The Nomade Raiz? Route Nomad? Yeah, I don't miss a single show of the Nomade Raiz. I had never heard of this Nomade Raiz. And he is already very well known to the point that even the guy at the car rental agency knows this Nomade Raiz. In other words, this progress through technology will arrive. It's a steamroller. The more traditional ones try to avoid it, but they won't succeed. Portugal will modernize itself through access to Brazilian social media. Fact. However, tradition will be maintained in the wines, in the cheeses, in the seasons for eating certain things, something that you guys there in the United States almost don't have, and in Brazil we don't have either, right? In Brazil, there isn't a season for eating this or that like there is in Europe. That will be maintained, and that is good. So, answering regarding this resistance, which was your question, not dodging it, but trying to provide the broadest cultural scope possible, because not everything is always about regulation. You sign it, and it works out. I believe Brazil will chip away at the edges, just like China did in Europe. So today, Europe talks about clean energy, about wind energy, and who is it that sells all the solar and wind energy technology to Europe? China. So how did they do that? By accepting that Europe is a country, a continent, excuse me, that talks about clean energy, that promotes clean energy, that wants clean energy. They never went there to fight against clean energy just to sell a product. And the same thing happens with Brazil, adapting here, adapting there, looking for a quality label here, a label there, and it will never compete with these premium European products. It will compete on price because that's what we are. We are a home that produces agricultural products. That's where our capacity lies. That's where our value is, and it will end up coming down to price.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask for 15 seconds for our commercial break, and we'll be right back.
All right.
For over 20 years, the Leaf Ferreira de Araujo firm has been providing quality, customized services for professionals, entrepreneurs, and investors coming to the United States. It also represents companies employing foreigners on a temporary or permanent basis with excellence. We understand that each client's case is unique and requires a specific approach. We maintain clear and objective communication with the client. Get in touch to find out more. leaflaw.com.
Let's go, Mrs. Portugal. Magda, let's go into a little more detail regarding an important way to understand and participate in the economy, which is being part of a board member, being a person who will provide guidance. How do you help our listener understand the role of a board member?
Excellent question. To start, how did all this begin, right? Portugal Europa was approached by the Board Academy, and today in Brazil you have some prestigious institutions that train company board members. You have IBGC, which is a classic, Fundação Dom Cabral, and the Board Academy, which has already trained more than 12,000 company board members. They approached us as a Brazilian service company that wants to position itself in the European market, starting, of course, with Portugal for obvious reasons of language, etc. I remember that in the meeting with their two directors, the first thing I said was, you have to change the language, you have to flip the switch. You can't just take a board member training course and put it in Portugal as if it were the best. It's that arrogance they didn't have, which is why they came to listen to us. But it's the same arrogance you mentioned that is the reason for the failure of so many companies. So what did we do? We set up, and I personally helped facilitate through my extensive network of professional contacts, a specialized Brazil-Europe board member training module. It was a significant initiative featuring the active participation of several major Portuguese figures from the global business world. So, for example, the corporate finance professor who will teach these future board members how to understand the company's numbers, the company's financial statements, is Rui Helena, who is currently the head of audit at BDO Portugal and is personally responsible for the audit of Banco Santander, just so you have an idea of the caliber of the people who will be the facilitators for these two classes. We also have Marianela Mepuri. Marianela is an heir to the Mepuri Group, the Mepuri Foundation. They work in aviation. They had an airline back in the day called Air Luxor, and today they have one of the largest companies in the world, a fleet of 34 Airbuses that lease aircraft. They have slots at practically every airport in the world. The company is run by her older brother, and she runs the family foundation, which has been dedicated since its inception to cleaning up the Tagus River. So today, you see several Mepuri Foundation boats passing by, cleaning up the Tagus River. They sponsor the Volvo Ocean Race, the Portuguese leg. They created a bioplastic, the Good Bottle, and their plan is to transform all plastic bottle usage in air travel, any and all of it, into this biodegradable plastic. So they have several real ESG initiatives, not just ones aimed at marketing. Marianela will be the person, Marianela Bipuri. She will be the facilitator for this group training board members, talking about ESG, about the importance, at least in Europe, of having a serious ESG department, regardless of the size of your company. Everyone can do a little bit within their own scale. And we will also have a director from Crowley, which is a large private equity and M&A firm, who will talk about how a Brazilian company can seek a strategic partner, pursue M&A, buy or be sold, and seek those lines of credit we mentioned here. All of this with a vision of training board members who have this transatlantic perspective. It's no use creating a beautiful board member course with all the Brazilian governance and forgetting what's on the other side. So we are going to train board members who can sit down and help the entrepreneur take their company to Portugal and then to Europe, who can understand European regulation, and who can speak that language I mentioned to you at the beginning, which is so important, which is the original Portuguese language, the language of Portugal itself.
No, that's wonderful. And today, how do Brazilian companies that are in Portugal, let's say, manage? What is the reality and the difficulties they encounter by not knowing the regulations? And as you very well highlighted, the regulations in Europe are extremely strict. They have to be followed, right? Have you noticed any difficulties for companies? We always say that you know the chance of success by the failures that have already occurred, right?
That's it.
What can you tell us about your experience about these mistakes that were made?
Look, I've been taking families and also business owners to establish themselves in Portugal for 15 years. In these 15 years, I've built a network of lawyers, brokers, and people like the ones I just mentioned, BDO, Crowley, and other even smaller consulting firms. So we could learn, trial and error. So we've been learning over these 15 years, not to make the same mistakes, because often it's through mistakes that we learn. The number one mistake of the Brazilian of the business owner speaking to your audience, which is the business owner, the number one mistake is not planning. I remember that when I finally opened the Lisbon office, which I invite you to visit, it's located in Chiado on the famous Rua Garrett, right in front of the Bertrand bookstore, which is the oldest bookstore in the world. No, we are there. When I opened it in June 2022, I invited Amir Klink, the Brazilian navigator, to speak to an audience of 120 Brazilians and Portuguese, but mostly Brazilians. And one of the things Amir did was make a connection between how Portugal prepared itself to launch into the oceans and discover Brazil and discover other places like the Indies, how they prepared themselves. There was a navigation school run by Prince Henry the Navigator. They prepared for years by studying astral maps, everything they had at their disposal before setting off on such an adventure. Oh, but how did the Portuguese set off just by guts and glory? It wasn't just by guts and glory. They spent years preparing themselves and preparing those who would board the ships and finally go to the New World. So what Amir said, I repeat, there is a level of planning that is necessary. What is planning? You can talk to us at Portugal Europa. You can talk to some other consultant who acts as an interface between Brazil and Portugal. But don't just go in blindly setting up your company, because you will need lawyers, you will need accountants, which they don't call contadores there. They call them contabilistas. You will need a series of professionals who will open a bank account. It's not that simple. It seems like it, but it's not that simple. So we act as facilitators, but a piece of advice for anyone and everyone listening to you who wants to set up their company in Europe, starting with Portugal, is plan. Today you have AI, you have social media, you have search engines. If you don't want to hire a professional like us, study, plan. Don't just show up there with guts and glory thinking, I have a great idea, it will work out. It might work out, but we don't want you to fall flat on your face for no reason.
Going back a little bit to the advisor, right?
Uh-huh.
One last foray into this area of yours. How do you train the advisor? Do they have classes?
They have classes?
How does
The Board Academy, actually, it's the Board Academy that trains them. They have already trained more than 12,000 advisors here in Brazil. They already have a scheduled course with several modules, from the corporate finance module to the regulation module, which is where these two initial classes we are doing now come in. Yes, they will also cover regulation in Europe. They provide training. So what is the target audience? It's a C-level executive who is currently a CFO or CEO or in a leadership position at a company, but who already foresees that in the future they want to serve on some company boards and wants to prepare for that. It's the audience I call in career transition, the between jobs crowd, who are tired of this corporate life, which is a life that demands a lot, but who want to use their entire wealth of knowledge to sit on a board and help business owners. Obviously, all of this with that transatlantic vision I mentioned to you, because the Board Academy trains board members here in Brazil for Brazilian companies that will remain here in Brazil. Our course has this European perspective. And they also have a very large audience, as they were telling me, of owners of small and medium-sized businesses who are already starting to think about succession and how to form a board in their companies to create governance.
no?
And to create succession possibilities through governance. So that's how they train board members. There are several modules, 10 modules, if I'm not mistaken, 10 or 12, and all of them are aimed at creating a board culture from governance and regulation to, as I just mentioned, finance, credit lines, M&A options, acquisitions, sales, everything that the board member is sitting there with someone who thinks often alone, which is the owner of the medium-sized company. He doesn't have an interlocutor to train who will be his interlocutor.
No, that is a commendable practice, because what we see, I participate in some boards, and
Uh-huh.
the fundamental regulation, the vision of the new corporate and business world has changed, as you put it well. Trump revolutionized trade relations, and if the company doesn't have someone to advise it on understanding what is happening, what will happen, the chance of failure is high. One last question. Yeah, for this listener of ours who is still watching and learning from you, how would you say that the person, what is the question they have to ask themselves? You've already given part of the answer. They should think about planning, but like introspectively.
Uh-huh.
With all your experience, if you were to advise someone, look, you intend to expand, you intend to scale up, what is the question they should ask themselves?
The basic question is, how prepared am I to step out of my comfort zone? You are going to step out of your comfort zone in everything from planning to arriving in the country, adapting, getting to know people, learning the language, switching languages, addressing people the way they address each other. How prepared am I and how much do I want this? Do I really want to leave my comfort zone? Because I won't be creating my comfort zone where I'm going.
Yes.
It will be a new reality. So like, oh, it's very nice. I have to grow in Europe because my company has affinities. I've already heard that this idea will be a success in Europe. Okay, but how prepared are you as an entrepreneur to leave a country where you more or less already know all the regulations, know how to survive, know how to live? Are you prepared to step out of your comfort zone? That is the question I would ask myself.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Magna. Fantastic. Your
I'm the one who thanks you.
chance to hear that.
I'm the one who thanks you.
The possibility was great. Let's stay in touch. We'll learn more.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barbarian team. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful.
Good night.
Good night then. Well, dear listeners, today we had the opportunity to understand a little more about the challenges. As we always say, we don't have problems. If we know the problem, we have challenges. And these challenges can only be overcome with knowledge. Magna gave us a very interesting and important lesson today on how to enter Europe as a whole, and Portugal in particular. Good night to you all. Stay with us. We will have good and interesting programs ahead to discuss how the corporate world can meet, particularly through courses, seminars, events, and associations. Stay with us.